Hello, everybody, and welcome to the live book signing for the trial, upside down, the trial of the
Greg,
century.
you got to get your own. You got to get your
And the
own book
gentleman
right,
in the
Greg.
lower box, Don Yeager, also my co-author. The book came out today. It's in bookstores nationwide, and it's available online as well. You can just go to thegreggjarrett.com and order it there, or you can go to Hannity.com. You may recognize the gentleman at the top of the box. And you can go to Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, the usual places. And again, you can just walk into a bookstore. It's there nationwide. Listen, this is a book signing, and the deal is I am going to be answering some of your questions. I'm going to be signing books simultaneously. And if you want a signed book, all you have to do is it's available right here on Premier Collectibles. I want to thank them for hosting it. And Don Yeager, thank you for being with us. Sean Hannity, who has been my friend for the last, 6 or 7 or 8 years as
we've gotten close. We've gotten close, Greg. And you know what? Okay, I just want to plug it for you, your own book, because it's amazing. And I started it and I can't put it down. And this really was the trial of the century. I learned more. And the thing I love about all your books, and you had 2 #1 bestsellers on the Russia Hoax. And again, you've been vindicated in everything that you wrote. If people take a side-by-side of the Durham Report and your books about the Russia Hoax and your follow-up bestseller, I mean, we had an ensemble cast that was really small that was unpeeling every layer of the onion every single day, and we've been vindicated starting with the Horowitz Report straight on through to the Durham Report. My biggest regret is that the Justice Department didn't follow through on what I think they should have done, and that's disturbing. But the impeccable amount of research that you put in your book, I watched you write those books, and I see this book, and I see the amount of detail and research and background that you bring to this. Probably modern day, everyone thinks the trial of the century is the O.J. Simpson case. It's not. And I'll let you explain it in your own words why this grabbed your interest. And I think when people hear it, they're going to be like, why don't I know more about this?
Right. It's so funny. We used to be on the same floor for years and years and years, and Sean's was one door down for me. And so I'd be laboring away on the Russia Hoax or the sequel Witch Hunt, and Sean would wander in, and he'd stand in the doorway and look at me and go, "What are you doing?" I'm on footnote number 1262.
That was all true.
Shake his head and laugh at me. And
by the way, you couldn't even walk through his office because there was piles everywhere, and to not step on a pile, you had to pretty much be a ballerina to tiptoe around your way to get to Gregg's office. And but it's a tribute to you because you take such intricate care and you go into deep depth and great detail and great specificity, and I always learn something from your work. And what you did with the Russia Hoax was some of your best, and now to see you take it to a whole other area and another level and educate people on the law and laws that really impacted this society for the long term, which I hope you'll get into. I mean, I'm not going to be on the whole hour with you, but I hope you will describe to people why this is important. You did give a great answer on my radio show today.
Yeah, you were very kind to have me on your radio show today, and we spent a load of time talking about the book and its importance in American history. But that aside, I do want to thank you for giving me the airtime. I would write columns and I'd send them to Sean, and I get this immediate message back. You got to be on Sean's show tonight, talk about your column. And you really elevated the attention to my writing and the columns, the books, and so forth. I can never thank you enough. And we were right about it all from the very beginning.
All of it.
You were the first person to catch on and I sort of followed your lead. You were dead on correct. So then I just wrote a book about basically everything that you had discovered and found out. Your name should have gone on the book. And somebody sent me an email the other day that said, you know, Durham spent all this time and money. He could have just reprinted your book, The Russia Hoax.
True. That's
Everything
actually
in
true.
the report was basically in your book and the sequel, Witch Hunt, as well. So,
Well, we had a small ensemble cast, and what made this cast work, and I think it's relevant to the trial of the century too, because of the amount of research you put into the book. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, all right, classic Gregg. I mean, obviously, he did a deep dive. But we had people like you and John Solomon and Sarah Carter and Catherine Herridge at the time was our colleague. And all of us had our own sources. All of us were working each angle of the story. And like every night somebody would have a different piece of the puzzle. And when I use the analogy, it was on peeling the layers of an onion. It was, because we didn't know, and we had to be perfect. We knew that. And I remember saying to everybody, guys, we can't get this wrong. There were times where I remember we even had two sources corroborating the same point, and I'd be like, I'm not ready to go with it yet. I want to get a little bit more background, a little bit more. I want to be that much more sure, because I knew if we got one thing wrong, we'd be criticized. Now, the congenital liar like Adam Schiff, he just, he can lie with impunity and there are no consequences for him. Or the people that sign those FISA warrants with, the bulk of information being, Hillary Clinton's dirty misinformation dossier now debunked. You were the first person that told me, have you read the dossier yet? He goes, it's the funniest thing you're ever going to read. I'm like, no, I haven't actually read it. I don't know. I didn't know I can get the full copy. And you gave it to me. And I'm reading it. And this is the P tape and everything in between. There are funny stories behind the scenes, but, to bring it to relevancy and this book, The Trial of the Century, why don't I just kind of hand it off to you? And I'll stick around for a few more minutes if you want. And I urge people to get this book. And you're going to get it because you're going to learn something that you never knew. And you're going to learn the details of the historical importance of this. And what I know about Gregg is historical context means a lot to you. And that comes through to both of you. I got to compliment you in this book. But, why don't you just lay out the foundation of what this is and why it's so relevant and important even to this day?
Well, let me just give it the setup, because this book is about 55 years in the making. And then Don will take some of our viewer questions and we'll answer them. And I'll sign some of the books I have stacked here right next to me. So I was a kid, barely a teenager, and my father had this wonderful library of books. He was a real bibliophile, and so was I. My love of books came from my father. And so one summer day, and I don't know why, and I opened the preface with this. I don't know why I did it, but I grabbed a book off my father's shelf, as I often did. And it was a book on Clarence Darrow, biography by one of the greatest writers of all time, Irving Stone, who wrote, Agony and the Ecstasy and Lust for Life. And he wrote a biography on Clarence Darrow. I still have it, 1941 published.
Wow.
So the book, by the time I was reading it, was like 30 years old. And it had been well read by my father. And I read it and I read it and I couldn't put it down. And the more, for days, I read this book, 520 pages. By the end, I started all over again. And it shaped the contours of my life. I became a lawyer because of Clarence Darrow. And people keep asking me, wait a minute, Darrow was a liberal. He was an agnostic. That's right. And I'm neither. But politics didn't define Clarence Darrow. It was his principles. I admired his values. And those values over my lifetime animated my own. And at the end of the book, towards the end of the Irving Stone book on Darrow, there was a chapter on the Scopes monkey trial, which I thought was utterly fascinating and riveting. And I kept reading it and reading it. And I determined right then and there, this had to be the trial of the century. People say, well, what do you mean monkey trial? It was a popular misconception at the time, dubbed by the media the monkey trial, that man evolved from monkeys and other primates. And it was a term that stuck. And yes, Sean's absolutely right. There are other famous cases, the Lindbergh kidnapping case, the Chicago Seven, the Nuremberg trial, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, Leopold and Loeb. All of these were trials of the century. And I covered OJ for 9 months inside the courtroom in Los Angeles. All of those cases pale in comparison to the overall importance to our nation. At stake and, really in jeopardy was free speech, civil liberties, academic autonomy, intellectual empowerment, and the indispensable proposition that no one should be told how to think. America was at the precipice. It was either going to be no more free speech and wholesale censorship and banning of books, or we were going to stand up for the Bill of Rights. And this young 25-year-old school teacher, John Scopes, and his intrepid lawyer, my idol, Clarence Darrow, stood up for what was right. And we enjoy those principles, especially free speech today, because of what happened in the trial of the century almost 100 years ago.
By the way, I want to just stand back and point out to people that are viewing this, listening to you and your passion, and this is why you became a lawyer, and that's in the beginning of the book, and the impact that all of this had on you, and the intricate detail that you bring to this, and the historical relevance and importance that reaches to modern day. I mean, this is what makes you so interesting to me and makes your writing so interesting to me. Because everything that you put together, not only well researched, but you've got a passion behind this. What you're describing with your father and your love of books is what happened to me the first time a radio microphone light went on. It just came flying out of me. And I just was a listener to the early days of talk radio, the pioneers of talk radio, stay up late at night. And it's like your destiny that you became this. If you can, maybe just a small synopsis on, okay, so Clarence Darrow becomes this influence in your life. This is why you want to become a lawyer. The importance even to modern day of why this trial impacts society even now.
Because we see the same sort of erosion of civil liberties that took place nearly 100 years ago. Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it, is the old saying, and not enough people know this particular history and what was at stake. And they are repeating itself. Partisan censorship, polarizing disinformation campaigns, indoctrination of students in classroom, the punitive cancel culture under the guise of social justice, demands to conform your thoughts have now supplanted robust debate in America. These are frightening concepts. We are doing exactly what they were doing almost 100 years ago in banning books and making it a crime to teach science in the classroom. I'm a devout individual. I'm deeply faithful. I'm certainly not a liberal. I'm not an agnostic as Darrow was. But boy, did I admire him for his passion of the law and his unyielding commitment to civil rights and civil liberties. And as I said before, it fortified my affection for the great man. He was known as the attorney for the damned. He defended people that nobody else would. He went against popular opinion. The despised, the oppressed, the underprivileged, those were his cherished clients. He championed their cause. Without him, they scarcely stood a chance. And you cannot help but admire somebody like that. He was reviled by so many, but for me, the greatest trial lawyer who ever lived, and a great individual who stood up for what's right in America.
You know, one important thing that really stood out to me, and we touched on this on radio today, is this issue of, you know, and again, he was not a believer. Like you, I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. And, you know, the idea that somehow many kind of think it's evolution or faith and as if they have to be separate and apart. I've never believed that. You know, the creator of universes within universes within universes, what I call God and my faith in Christ and Jesus. In other words, you can have a creator that also created evolution and the development of mankind as part of the plan. And, you know, other people over the years, you know, have taken a position it's one or the other. It's not. I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. And we discussed that today. That was a great point you made.
Well, I was so amazed at your take on it because, frankly, it's Clarence Darrow's take as well. It was his argument all along. It is the position of, you know, all major Christian religions, the Pope, Pope Francis, building on the works of you know, prior popes, John Paul II and Pope Pius XII. Has said that these are two concepts, creationism and evolution, that live in perfect harmony. As the Pope said,
I wish I was that articulate, but yes.
The Pope said that evolution presupposes creationism. And it's likely that God created the origin of life by utilizing evolution. And that's, you know, that's the point on your radio show today. And just now you made so elegantly.
Yeah. Well, look, I know you've got a lot to discuss. The only thing I'm going to tell people, and you're a little probably too shy to do it, so I will do it for you. As one of my closest friends, and I think the world of you. I mean, this book, I now understand why. I understand you better. I understand what influenced you more. I understand how you were able to take this and develop it into what is as relevant a case now today as it was however many years ago. And the fact that you developed this passion for it at a young age just makes it even more inspiring to me. Your knowledge of this is infectious. It creates a curiosity in me to want to know even more. And I know in the next, 45 minutes or so with this great audience here on Premier Collectibles that you're going to be getting into a lot of the questions in depth and detail. And we haven't heard from your co-author yet, which is really awful.
Not at
I knew
all.
I was only here for 15
No,
minutes.
are you kidding me? Like I'm enjoying the conversation. This is great.
Well, I mean, a credit to you as well for working with Gregg. He's hard to work with. It's easy.
Not at all true. Trust me.
Not at all true. I agree.
Sean, thank you.
But I would just want to say to people, you see that pile of books there. Those are first print editions that you can get a signed copy of. And I promise you, you're going to walk away with a depth and knowledge that you never thought you had and learn so much and be able to apply it. It's all applicable to what we're going through today and the battles over the culture. And, I said on the air tonight, I never thought, furry creatures and the law in Florida or, battles over, quite inappropriate sex education for kids in first and third grade about gender identity. We don't teach kids to read, write, do math, science, history, and computers, but we're going to work on gender identity and CRT. And I never thought I'd watch or witness a day where Congress is interviewing a potential cabinet official and having to ask them to define what is a woman, questions that we never thought we'd have before. But you can really look back at this book, in this case, as relevant to those discussions and the impact on society. So, I urge people, go to Premier Collectibles, get a copy of this. It's in your bookstores locally. We have a link on Hannity.com, Amazon.com. I'm proud of you. I appreciate you letting me be a small part of this. I wish everybody the best. And this book is I am telling you, word of mouth is going to push this book all across the country. And it's going to be another top bestseller. And I wish you congratulations.
Thank you very much. People have no idea how hard this gentleman works. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. I once actually did his entire job one day, and it took me a week to recover from it. He does 3 hours of radio. Think about the prep time, 3 hours of live radio. And then he does an hour of live television. Sometimes he has a studio audience. He flies off to locations to do town halls and so forth, as you're doing later this week. I mean, it's an unbelievable, exhausting schedule. I don't know where you get the energy, but I admire you deeply, and I'm privileged to say I'm your friend.
I want to be the first to say congrats on a #1 bestseller, and we are dear friends, and I think the world of you. And Mr. Co-author, now that I'm leaving, you can take over. Congratulations to you as well, and I'm very happy for you. Anyway, you can get it right there at Premier Collectibles. I hope people get their copy. Get a signed copy. I always like signed copies. So, Trial of the Century. Gregg Jarrett, congrats, my friend.
Thank you very much. You've already got your signed copy. So get some rest, Sean. Thank you.
All right, guys. Congrats again.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right, Don Yeager, you have sat
hard to follow that
patiently as Sean and I yammered on and on about each other and our work and so forth. So jump in here, pal.
No, I have to tell you, that was fun. It was, what I loved, Greg, was that he so perfectly put something that I've said to you several times since we began this project almost 2 years ago, is the idea that your passion for it is what makes a book like this work. There are a lot of folks who will take a subject on because there's profit to be generated, there's money to be made. But this, for you, as much as anything, was a passion project. And I know part of what I'm going to do over the course of what we have left here is ask you some questions from the audience, but I also wanted to ask a couple that I'd love to dig into again. You've already mentioned this idea that your father it was a book that you found on his shelf that really got you going. But it's funny, sometimes today it feels that when we read something that's from someone or about someone who we don't necessarily agree with, and we don't seek to look for the things we can identify. I love that you could see the things you wouldn't agree with in Darrow, but there was so much about him that drew you to him. His passion, can you share a little bit about why this was the guy that when the idea came up, you were like, that's the story we need to do?
He was the attorney for the damned, and that was appealing to me. It was a curiosity.
Isn't that interesting? Like, most people don't want to be the attorney for the damned. Most people don't even want to necessarily study them. But that's a fascinating thing for me to hear you say that.
Yeah, and when you open the Irving Stone book, again, 1941, there is an epigraph at the beginning. It's a quote from Clarence Darrow, and he says, "I may hate the sin, but never the sinner." Mm. And I'm like, 14 years old at the time. And I remember pausing to consider what that meant and reflected on it. And it had such an impact on me. And the book hadn't even started. It's the epigraph. It's a quote at the beginning of the book. At the beginning of my book, I have a different quote from Clarence Darrow about the trial of the century, the Scopes Monkey trial. But, that piqued my curiosity as a 14-year-old. What does that really mean? And I think I know what it means, but I'm not sure. And I got to keep reading to find out. And then I found out that under our system of justice, under the Constitution, everybody is entitled to a fair trial by a jury of their peers, You don't always get it. He didn't get it in the Scopes
This
Monkey
case.
trial in Dayton, Tennessee. You're entitled to a defense. And, this was a period in time with if you couldn't afford a lawyer, you didn't get one. That changed in the early 1960s, but Darrow didn't care. And he represented so many people for free. I mean, Darrow could have been an incredibly rich man. At one point in time, he had spent so much money defending the indefensible who couldn't pay him that he had to sell his book collection out of his home. And, you dug up that little fact, Don. See, people need to understand that Don and I, this was a real collaborative effort. I focused on the trial because we obtained together a copy of the original trial transcript when you and I visited the courthouse in Dayton, Tennessee. So we split up the work. I tackled the trial, the strategy, based on the trial transcript. Don, he had the tougher job. He had to dig up all of the historical facts and perspectives associated with not just the town of Dayton, Tennessee, but these incredible figures in American history. Clarence Darrow, William Jennings Bryan, the great fundamentalist leader who was the prosecutor in the case, who helped get these terrible, oppressive laws passed, criminalizing science. You dug into H.L. Mencken, who was the incredible acerbic journalist, most popular in America. Everybody read his syndicated column out of Baltimore. And you dug deep into the guy who really became sort of the victim in all of this, and that's John Scopes, this amiable, young 25-year-old, unassuming, nice guy school teacher, who got arrested for teaching evolution. And it ruined his life. And
It really did.
You were the one who dug that up.
Well, thank you. Well, it was fascinating, as you said. I mean, the way we were able to divide the work up a little bit, but I couldn't have done what you did, and so I'm grateful that we were able to kind of collaborate in that way. But I wanted to ask one. We have a question here from Jeffrey in Bradenton, Florida.
And I'm signing the books as you pose the question.
You sign as I pose a question. I was wondering, what takeaways did you get from writing the book, and what takeaways you think and hope readers will get from it as well? Thank you so much. I've enjoyed seeing you on TV for so many years.
Well, when you write a book, the first two books I wrote, The Russia Hoax Witch Hunt, I wrote all by myself. An exhausting endeavor, because a current events book has to be written quickly, but meticulously. Otherwise, it's no longer a current event book by the time, the book comes out. An exhausting endeavor. But as you research books, and it was true of Trial of the Century, my latest book, you continue to learn. I mean, every day I hope that I learn something new. And that's what's so wonderful about our life and our freedoms. It allows us to read anything and everything. And what worries me as I wrote this book is that, that can all be lost overnight. You can lose our Bill of Rights, our civil rights, our civil liberties, intellectual freedom, and academic autonomy and free speech. You can lose that in a nanosecond. All it takes is the prevailing popular opinion at any given moment that sways, not just fellow Americans, but our institutions of government. And we've seen them abused and corrupted, as I've written so many columns about that. And so, these are precious rights, and they can so easily be squandered if we're not careful. And that's what really, I learned a lot about that in the Trial of the Century. I saw how close we came back in 1925 to losing it all. And there was no going back. I mean, once you start banning books, I mean, as Darrow said, where do you stop it? Are you going to ban magazines? Are you going to ban newspapers? Are you going to ban everything?
It
Except
doesn't go with your opinion.
Yeah. So, at any rate, that's what I learned. Let me sign another book. Another question.
Please do it. So, one question was Darrow had some incredible highs and lows over his career. There's some notes in here being run out of California, even, talking about taking his own life at one point, right?
Yeah.
But with all of this, as you so eloquently just define him, best lawyer in America. What do you think was the secret ingredient that made him so successful?
His human frailty that afflicts us all. He was, he was like you and me, a normal person. He made mistakes, some egregious mistakes. You're referring to the great McNamara Brothers Union trial in Los Angeles, where two brothers were accused of blowing up a building in which people died. They were union leaders, and they were put on trial, and Darrow was their defense attorney. And at one point in time, Darrow was arrested and charged with bribing a juror. And, historians have debated whether he was framed or whether he really did it in a moment, in a total lapse of judgment. And we all make mistakes, some worse than others. I side with those people who believe that Darrow probably did it. And it resulted in Darrow distraught, depressed, grieving over what I think he'd done, that he shows up at a friend's house who's actually been his mistress, former mistress. And it's a rainy night. He's got an overcoat on, and he's got a bottle of whiskey in one hand, and he's got a gun loaded in the other. And he knocks on the door of his longtime female friend. She opens the door, and he says, "I'm going to kill myself." Over the next several hours, as the night went on, she talked him out of it and calmed him down over a few more glasses of liquor. It was a moment in Darrow's life where it could have gone either way.
Right.
And he recovered from it. And I admired his perseverance, his determination. And, as the mistress said to him, "Darrow," and she always called him Darrow, not Clarence. He hated Clarence. "Darrow, you've got to defend yourself. You've got to fight on." And, we all have pivotal moments in our lives in which, we can either give up or we give in, or we can fight and try to do better and, try to fix ourselves. And Darrow was
the defender of the damned should fix himself, right?
Yeah. It was so amazing.
Grab another book. So we have Sarah from North Carolina who says you've done so many incredible things in your career, your books and television. What would you consider a highlight that you would when you think of the highlight of your career?
I think it's writing books. I always wondered, am I capable of writing a book? So many people do. Especially people who read books and they say, "Wow, can I do that? I wonder if I can do that." Some people try and they don't follow through with it. It takes a lot of perseverance. But I'll tell you what, a pivotal moment in my life came in 1991. I was a reporter in Wichita, Kansas. And it was my day off, and I'd been shooting a documentary on my day off, and I'm coming home on the interstate. And all of a sudden, we see my photographer and I see a funnel cloud. And we got out, took a picture, because, you always want a nice video picture for the evening news, some weather shot. All of a sudden, things getting larger and larger. And I look at Ted, my photographer, and we look at you. We better get out of here. Obviously, it's getting bigger and bigger for a reason. We turn around and head north on the interstate in the southbound lane. I jump the center divider and and you can hear Ted saying to me, and he's hanging out the back window with his camera, "It's gaining on us, Gregg. It's gaining on us. You got to go, man. You got to go." And I'm complaining to him, "I got the pedal to the metal." It was an old Ford Taurus loaded down with camera equipment. I wasn't going to go that fast. Thing chases us down the highway, and it's Kansas. There's nothing there. There was a highway overpass, a bridge newly built, steel girders embedded in concrete. We pulled up. Ted's got the camera still running. He never turned it off. Smart man. We crawl up the embankment, tuck ourselves in the girder, and the tornado hits us dead center. I think it's the only video of a tornado going right through a television camera. They still play it on, the History Channel and Discovery Channel and the Weather Channel and so the Kansas Turnpike tornado. I was known after that as Mr. Twister. It was the only time in my life I thought I was going to die. Seriously, I'm driving the car. I'm looking in the rearview mirror. This thing is bearing down on us with eyeballs. And I'm thinking to myself, good Lord, I'm going to die in Kansas. And, I'm only like 35 years old. So that was an important moment in my life, and we managed to survive it. Although in that same day, other twisters that ripped through that same area killed 20 people and devastated the town of Andover. Anyway, long story. Sorry about that.
No, are you kidding me? I think that's what people sign on and watch these things for. Rachel from Michigan asks a question here. As a college student, what advice do you have for someone who is trying to stand up for truth amongst people who think vastly differently?
Be vigilant, be tolerant at the same time.
There's your answer.
Don't go along with the conformity crowd that demands that you capitulate and not think for yourself. Especially on college campuses now, this sort of cancel culture. You can only believe our orthodoxy or else. And it's fundamentally wrong. And, it's happening on campuses everywhere. At my law school alma mater, a speaker who was conservative was an invited speaker, and was shouted down and driven out of the auditorium because people didn't want to listen to diversity of opinion. That's anti-American. It's in violation of the principles of free speech. And in that particular case, because it was a state-supported school, I went there for free because I was a California resident. It's a strict violation of the First Amendment. So, don't go along with the crowd. But at the same time, be tolerant of other people's opinion. It's so amazing what you can learn from people with whom you disagree. You will consider things you never thought, you would want to listen to. Sometimes you need to hear things you don't want to hear.
Well, that's the beauty of like a guy like you having a guy like Clarence Darrow as a hero, right? You can,
absolutely.
You can learn an awful lot from people who don't necessarily agree with you on some key things. I wanted to ask you, it seems like every few years, and you made reference to this when Sean was on, we have a new declared trial of the century, right? But this still stands out after almost a century, especially to you. Why do you think this trial cast such a long shadow after all this time?
Well, because the issue at stake was so important to our everyday lives, free speech. But it cast a long shadow on the town of Dayton, Tennessee. They thought that hosting this trial would bring back their town, which had been, decimated by the closing of the coal mines, right? I mean, you wrote about this so well in our book together. And it didn't work out that way. You know, I think that for for Americans back then in 1925, this was the first trial broadcast live on radio, WGN, to a riveted nationwide audience. I mean, people stopped what they were doing so they could tune into the radio. I mean, it was very much like FDR's later fireside chats, right? Everybody stopped and listened, but they listened to this trial. Journalists the world over converged on this tiny town of Dayton, Tennessee.
Hard to get to.
Yeah. I mean, they had a train. That's how Darrow got there. That's how Brian got there. And, you know, they had newsreel cameras set up at the back of the courtroom. There are 38 photographs in our book. And these are wonderful photographs that I obtained from Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee, in the archives there. And it shows newsreel cameras set up in the back of the courtroom. It's cavernous second floor courtroom. And there was always a waiting plane on the outskirts of town to fly the film and the newsreel up to Chicago, where it was immediately distributed to movie theaters everywhere so people could watch the trial of the century. All the major newspapers were there in the United States, outside the United States, banner headlines every day. They even took to reprinting in the next morning's edition some of the trial proceedings, the transcript of the trial proceedings. So people were absolutely fascinated by this. And the climactic moment came when Clarence Darrow knows he's losing the case and calls the great William Jennings Bryan, the fundamentalist leader in America, who joined the prosecution team to convict Scopes, calls him to the witness stand as an expert on the Bible, knowing that Bryan couldn't resist. The judge moves the trial to an outdoor platform left over from the 4th of July festivities. He's worried the courtroom might collapse, plus the stifling heat. People are fainting. So out on this platform, and there's a wonderful photograph in our book of the two lions, Darrow versus Bryan. Darrow cross-examining Bryan, that not everything in the Bible should be taken literally. And the thousands, the throngs of people who were watching it through loudspeakers outdoors in the searing heat. And the audience who began the day adoring Bryan, by the end of the withering cross-examination by Darrow, began to laugh at Bryan and mocked him. And it utterly destroyed him and broke him, so much so that 5 days later, still in Dayton, Tennessee, trying to resurrect his tattered reputation, he lays down for a nap and never wakes up. And there's a photograph in the book of Bryan in a casket, flag draped, being loaded onto a Pullman car and being taken up to Arlington National Cemetery up in Washington, Virginia area. There was a part of me that felt so sorry for Bryan. He was this wonderful, important figure in American history, and yet his hubris destroyed him.
You know, and you need to go ahead and sign another book there. But I would love to ask you a question. We've talked so much about Darrow. You know, there's a temptation sometimes to dismiss William Jennings Bryan as just kind of a closed-minded simpleton because of the role that he played, especially in that scene you just described there. But he ranked as one of the most influential figures in America at the time.
Yeah.
And what do you see as the legacy of Bryan, especially, you know, after the way, as you said, his last real public display of his intellect was in some ways laughed off the stage?
Yeah, it was a sad epitaph for a once great man, a great statesman, a great American. You know, people don't realize he was the Democratic nominee for president, not once, not twice, but 3 times, which is one heck of an accomplishment. And he was a brilliant, mesmerizing orator, poetic, like Darrow. They were very much alike, and they were friends
They
initially.
were friends, right?
Yeah. Darrow was there in 1896 at the Democratic National Convention and watched perhaps one of the greatest speeches ever delivered, probably in the top 10. If you ask any historian, top 10, they'll say William Jennings Bryan's Cross of Gold speech. Now, it seems like a very dry subject, right? Gold versus silver monetary policy. But it was
But he made it.
spellbinder.
Yep.
And this young guy who was only, 36 years old, comes out of nowhere based on the Cross of Gold speech and becomes the nominee.
Yep.
And, he had such a bright future ahead of him and his quest to be president of the United States. And I think, by the way, he would have been a very good one, was never achieved. And, I think even as he's sitting there on the witness stand at the beginning of the famous cross-examination with Clarence Darrow, I think in the back of his mind, Bryan thought, this could be another shining moment. This could be another cross of gold for me. This could once again elevate me to the presidency. He was in his 60s, right? But he was in bad health. But, the mind still tells you can still do it.
That's right. You still believe. I'm going to ask you, I'd love to ask you another one of the questions here. We have Ray from Georgia.
Okay.
Who says, in a world where, there are no absolute truths, and sometimes it feels like the news is biased. How do you make sure and where can we kind of guard ourselves and go find accurate information? How do we do that in a world that seems so polarized?
Well, true objectivity is unattainable because we're human beings. We're flawed. We sometimes pretend in our own minds that we're telling both sides of the story when in fact we're not. It's too much in journalism where your own bias tends to seep into your storytelling. It affects the stories that you choose to report on and the way you tell those stories. And so if you're looking for pristine objectivity and neutrality, you're going to be looking for a very long time to find it. So I think
you better hope for ChatGPT to get better.
Yeah, it's true. I think the best self-remedy is diversity of thought, and that means diversity of sources. So, for example, I read so many newspapers a day, and then I read a compilation of domestic, international, and opinion sections. And I try to read them all. There are some obviously liberal news organizations, newspapers. I'll read those. I'll read the conservatives. And, it's up to you as a consumer of news and information to decide what you're going to believe, what you're going to like, what you're going to trust, and what not.
I know you're signing a few more there, but our trusty partner in this program, Olivia, has sent us a note that we're coming toward our close here. I'd love, if you could maybe bring us in for a little bit of a landing on what your hope is for this project, and what you hope is the thing that if people only come out of this with one or two little nuggets, something of encouragement from Gregg Jarrett would be helpful here.
Well, I've said it before, but it bears repeating. The old saying, and it is so true, which is why it's always said, those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. And I think it's important to read this book because America was at the abyss and so close to eliminating the most precious right to me in the Bill of Rights. It's the reason it's the First Amendment. It's both the Establishment Clause and the Free Speech Clause and the right to assemble and petition your government over your grievance. They were going to eliminate that back in 1925. And I think in many ways, but for the trial of the century and Clarence Darrow and John Scopes, and even a hat tip to H.L. Mencken, the tide turned and public opinion shifted dramatically, almost overnight, because people were paying attention to this trial. They were listening to it on radio. Yeah, they were watching newsreels in movie houses. They were reading voraciously all of the accounts in the major newspapers across America and even the smaller newspapers across America. I mean, in Dayton, Tennessee, this tiny town was jammed with 200 plus journalists, which back in 1925 is saying something.
A lot.
Yeah. And so I think it's important that you read how close we came in America to being a different nation and how perilous that was. And how, you know, unless we're careful, we can do it all over again in a very different, bad way.
Gregg Jarrett, thank you for allowing me to be your teammate. I appreciate the opportunity to have enjoyed tonight with you as well, and Sean, and opportunity just to continue to learn.
Well, listen, you are a wonderful co-author. You are a gifted writer. And I think you liked what I wrote. I loved what you wrote. And I couldn't have asked for a better partner. And thank you so much. You devoted so much time and energy to this project. I got enthused because you were enthused, and I think we fed off each other.
And I got enthused because of you. So
yeah, it was a wonderful collaboration. And so thank you so much. Again, as we wrap it up, I'm signing these books. I'm going to sign all of these down here. Believe it or not, my ink seems to be running dry. But I got another one over here, and I'm going to sign them all. If you want a personalized or a signed copy by me, Trial of the Century, you can get it right here on this website, which is Premier Collectibles. There's also a link on my personal website, thegreggjarrett.com. Somebody else had greggjarrett.com, so I had to go with the Gregg Jarrett. People buy up domains, right? So
explain that.
I'm not going to pay them money for my name.
Right. Heck no.
Change it to thegreggjarrett.com. You can order the book there. You can get a personalized copy, or at least signed copy. Or you can just go to bookstores across America. The book is there as of today and probably will be tomorrow. Don Yeager, you're a great man, and thank you very, very much for all you've done.
Awesome. Thank you. Bring it in for a close, Livia. It's all yours.
Okay.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.